The war did not begin with hatred, but with fear, a fear born when the sky tore open and revealed the other species for the first time. Humans watched the stars as explorers and dreamers, while the Elendri watched them as guardians of ancient borders. When the first human vessels crossed the veiled reach, Elendri sent warnings encoded in light and gravity. Humans did not understand and answered with engines and forward momentum. Misunderstanding hardened into panic. Panic turned into weapons, and the first battles scattered fire across the black between worlds. Human cities rang with sirens and speeches about survival. Elendri hives echoed with songs of mourning and resolve. Both sides believed the other was an invading tide, and both prepared to drown the threat before it could rise higher. Fleets clashed in spirals of plasma and crystal. Soldiers on both sides learned the terrible sameness of fear in the moment before impact. The void watched silently, patient and vast. Years passed, measured by wreckage fields and names carved into memory. Children of both species grew up with stories that painted the enemy as monsters. Yet even in the height of war, small doubts flickered. Human scouts recovered Elendri artifacts that told stories of caretaking stars rather than conquering them. Elendri seers sensed an echo of curiosity in human transmissions that did not match the tone of invaders. But war is loud and doubt is quiet. The turning point came not from victory, but from exhaustion. Supply lines thinned, morale fractured, and commanders began to see that every gain sector cost more than it could ever give. The war reached a brutal stalemate at the edge of a dead system where a sun had collapsed long ago. There the fleets faced each other across drifting dust and silence, weapons primed yet unmoving, as if the universe itself demanded a pause. In that dead system, sensors screamed without warning. Something moved where nothing should move. Space folded inward like a wound reopening. From the wound poured the void, a phenomenon neither species had fully understood. It was not empty but hungry, consuming energy, matter, and even memory. Ships caught at the edge went dark without explosions, simply erased. Panic shattered the fragile pause. Human admirals ordered retreat. Elendri war choruses shifted into alarms, but escape vectors collapsed as the void expanded, swallowing trajectories and rewriting physics. In desperation, a human captain broadcast an open channel, not a challenge, but a plea. Elendri translators hesitated for a heartbeat, then answered. The first alliance was born in fragments and static. Tactics were exchanged mid-battle. Elendri gravity weavers stabilized corridors through the distortion. Human engineers rerouted power in ways the Elendri had never attempted. Together they saved ships that would have been lost alone. The void recoiled not in pain, but in delay, as if confused by resistance that did not fit its pattern. When the surviving fleets regrouped, the truth became unavoidable. The void was not drawn by territory or species, but by conflict itself. It fed on energy released by war. Every battle had been a beacon. The war between humans and Elendri had called the void closer. Realization struck harder than any weapon, shame and clarity intertwined. A ceasefire was declared without ceremony. There were no cheers, only weary acknowledgement. Representatives met in neutral space, faces and forms tense but honest. They spoke of losses, of mistakes, and of the void growing stronger with every delay. The choice was stark: stand together or vanish separately. Alliance did not erase history. Distrust lingered in every shared corridor and command deck. But necessity has a way of sharpening cooperation. Mixed crews trained under relentless schedules. Humans learned to read Elendri bioluminescent signals. Elendri adapted to human verbal chaos and rapid improvisation. Misunderstandings still sparked, yet fewer than before. Science became the new battlefield, but this time against the void. Joint teams discovered that the void was a cascading absence, a region where the constants of reality unraveled. It could not be destroyed, only contained or starved. Containment required harmony between opposing forces, a balance neither species could achieve alone. They built the lattice, a network of anchors combining human ally resilience and Elendri living crystal, placed at strategic points to dampen void expansion. The first activation nearly failed, feedback surged, crews braced for collapse. But the system held, the void slowed, its edge fraying like mist in sunlight. Hope returned cautiously. On distant fronts, soldiers who once fought each other now shared rations and stories. They compared home skis and myths, discovering parallels that felt unsettling and comforting. Songs and music crossed cultures, not as propaganda, but as reminders of what survival meant. The Alliance faced its first true test when the Void adapted. Tendrils bypassed the lattice, targeting population centers. Evacuation plans were executed with joint precision. Losses were heavy, but coordinated defense saved millions. Trust deepened not through words, but through action. Victory demanded sacrifice. The Void could be stalled, but only by overloading anchors in a controlled collapse. A final line had to be drawn. Elendry seers calculated probabilities. Human strategists weighed lives against futures. The numbers were unforgiving. Someone would have to hold the line from within the Void long enough for the network to seal. Volunteers stepped forward from both species. Crews formed without regard for origin, only for skill and resolve. Among them were veterans who had once faced each other across gun sites, now sharing a final mission. As the operation began, the Void surged violently, reacting to the threat of starvation. Inside the distortion, reality screamed, time stuttered, memories bled into the dark. Crews fought not with weapons but with alignment, maintaining the balance of forces. One by one, anchors ignited and collapsed, each collapse pushing the Void back further. The final anchor required manual stabilization. A combined crew stayed behind, transmitting calm updates as the rest escaped. Their last message was simple and steady. The seal closed. The Void recoiled beyond the lattice, weakened and distant. The cost was immense, but the universe remained. In the quiet after, grief and relief intertwined. Memorials were built not to species, but to unity. Names were etched together, indistinguishable in honor. The Alliance was formalized not as a military pact alone, but as a shared stewardship of space. Borders were redrawn as cooperative zones. Exploration resumed with caution and consent. First contact protocols were rewritten with humility at their core. Humans and Elendry taught their children a different story now, not of monsters, but of mirrors. The Void still existed. Distant but remembered, its threat a lesson rather than a shadow. Joint watch stations monitored the dark, staffed by mixed crews who laughed, argued, and planned futures together. From war to alliance, the path had been carved through loss and courage. Two species had learned that survival was not about dominance, but about connection, and in that understanding, the stars felt a little less cold. Years after the sealing of the Void, vigilance became a way of life rather than a state of alarm. Human and Elendry outposts circled key regions where reality had once thinned. Their instruments tuned not only to energy, but to emotion, for they had learned that fear itself could resonate across dimensions. The watch was formed from veterans and scholars, engineers and artists, individuals chosen not only for skill, but for balance. They rotated through long shifts where nothing happened and shorter moments where everything threatened to unravel. In those quiet hours, stories flowed freely, memories of war softened into lessons. A new generation grew within the Alliance, children who spoke both languages without effort, who saw the other species not as allies but as neighbors. Their art blended styles, their science blended philosophies. They asked questions that neither culture alone had ever considered, and in their curiosity lay the strongest defense against repeating the past. Yet the universe is never static. Faint tremors began to ripple at the edges of monitored space, not a resurgence of the Void, but echoes, like scars aching long after a wound has healed. Debates arose within the Council. Some argued for preemptive expansion of the lattice. Others warned against provoking what might be resting rather than retreating. The decision came through consensus rather than command. Exploration vessels were dispatched together, lightly armed and heavily equipped with sensors and diplomats. They traveled beyond mapped regions, discovering remnants of civilizations erased long before humans or Elendry reached the stars, evidence that the Void had consumed many who stood alone. These discoveries reshaped purpose. The Alliance was no longer merely defending itself. It was preserving the fabric of existence for all who might one day emerge. Rescue beacons were seeded across unstable zones. Knowledge archives were left in protected orbits. messages written in universal patterns, warnings and invitations intertwined. When a minor breach flared unexpectedly near a remote colony, response was immediate and unified. There was no question of jurisdiction or blame. Fleets moved as one. The breach was contained with minimal loss. And afterward, the colony held a joint remembrance not for what was lost, but for what had been saved. In the Grand Councils, elders spoke openly of fear returning someday, but also of confidence earned. They knew the void might evolve, or another unknown might rise, yet they trusted the alliance forged in shared sacrifice. Under unfamiliar constellations, human and Elendry sent a combined signal into the dark, not a challenge and not a warning, but a statement of presence and intent that this region of space was watched, cared for, and united. The stars answered only with silence, but it was no longer an empty silence. It was a pause filled with possibility, held steady by two species who had learned that standing together was not the end of the story, but the beginning. Time moved forward as it always does, indifferent yet shaped by those who dared to act. The alliance matured into something quieter and stronger than its founders had imagined. Joint cities drifted in stable orbits, their architecture blending human angles with Elendry curves, light and shadow, designed not for defense, but for life. History was no longer taught as a single line of triumphs and failures, but as a braided narrative. Students studied the war alongside the alliance, learning how easily fear could distort perception, and how difficult yet vital it was to choose understanding over instinct. Simulations allowed them to experience moments of decision, not to glorify battle, but to feel the weight of consequence. The Watch continued its patrols, but its role evolved. Artists accompanied scouts, recording the emotional textures of new regions. Philosophers debated engineers during long voyages, asking not just how to stabilize reality, but why it mattered. These conversations shaped policy more than any weapon ever had. Whispers of new intelligences began to surface, faint signals at the edge of detection, patterns too deliberate to be cosmic noise. The Council approached with restraint born of memory. No fleets were mobilized, no warnings issued. Instead, a single emissary vessel was prepared, crewed equally by human and Elendry, carrying archives of shared history rather than armaments. As the vessel crossed into the unknown, crews back home watched with a mixture of pride and quiet fear. The void had taught them that the universe responded to intent as much as action. This time, intent was offered openly, without dominance or surrender. The emissary returned months later, bearing confirmation of contact, not with enemies, but with observers, ancient and cautious, who had watched the rise and near fall of both species. They spoke of the alliance as a rarity, a convergence that altered probability itself. They warned that unity created ripples, attracting attention both benevolent and dangerous. Rather than retreat, the Council chose transparency. Records of the void, the war, and the alliance were shared freely. Trust was extended without guarantee. The observers responded in kind, exchanging knowledge of other threats and other survivals, expanding the map of reality beyond anything previously imagined. In ceremonies held across countless worlds, a symbol was unveiled, two flames intertwined within a circle, representing not victory but continuity. The shared flame was adopted as a reminder that existence endured through cooperation, not conquest. As generations passed, individuals no longer measured their identity by species alone. They spoke, instead of belonging to the alliance of the shared flame, a living testament to lessons paid for dearly. Far beyond the known reaches, the void stirred faintly, sensing change it could not yet consume, and for the first time it hesitated. While within the alliance, life continued, watchful, hopeful, and resolute, knowing that the story was still being written, not by fate alone, but by choice. The alliance learned that peace was not a destination, but a discipline, something practiced daily through attention and care. Councils met not only to respond to threats, but to listen for imbalance within themselves, because the elders remembered how easily unity could fracture when fear went unspoken. As centuries unfolded, technology advanced beyond what the founders could have imagined. Minds were augmented, lifespans extended. And vessels crossed distances once thought unreachable, yet the core principles remained deliberately simple: no expansion without dialogue, no defense without reflection, no discovery without responsibility. The shared flame became more than a symbol. It was encoded into law and education. Every citizen, human and elendry alike, spent time in service beyond their home systems, learning the perspectives of others, witnessing the fragile beauty of unfamiliar worlds. This exchange wove empathy into the structure of society itself. Occasionally, fractures appeared, disputes over resources, philosophy, or pace of change, but conflict was addressed openly, not suppressed. The memory of the void ensured that escalation was never abstract. Everyone knew what unchecked division could summon from the dark. At the farthest edge of mapped space, a new phenomenon emerged, not absence like the void, but excess, regions where reality overflowed, spawning unstable matter and unpredictable life. Once such anomalies might have sparked fear or conquest, now they inspired caution and cooperation. Research teams were assembled with diplomats alongside scientists. In one such region, explorers encountered a fledgling civilization just beginning to look outward, their signals clumsy but hopeful. The moment echoed the Alliance's own past. Hesitation filled the command decks. The temptation to intervene, to warn, to guide, or to withdraw entirely weighed heavily. After long deliberation, the Alliance chose restraint, observation without interference, protection without revelation. They would guard the region from predatory forces, including the distant remnants of the void, while allowing the young civilization to find its own path. The choice honored both compassion and humility. Back within Alliance space, storytellers preserved these decisions as carefully as battles, teaching that the hardest victories were often invisible, measured not by change imposed, but by change patiently allowed. Under shared skis, festivals marked the anniversary of the first ceasefire, not with triumphal displays, but with quiet lights released into space, each light representing a choice made toward unity rather than fear. And so the Alliance endured, not because it believed the darkness was gone forever, but because it accepted that the choice to stand together would need to be made again and again, as long as there were stars to watch and voices willing to answer one another.